All right, guys. Well, here we are. So another day of working on the documentary. I think it's an exciting time for me, for you. If you're excited about the documentary like I am, I don't know if you're as excited as I am, but I'm very excited about it. And it's cool to have Patreon because I have basically a market that I can test. You know, I can show you guys cuts, and then if you don't like it, I'm just like, what? You want to see my asshole? What's up? Show it, and then you guys report me. I get charged with being just a little bit too tan. They're like, tans like that, you're just asking to get your dick sucked. Sorry, this is what happens when I don't do a monologue. But no, in all seriousness, it's been really nice being able to have a place, a contained audience where I can upload cuts, and I'm really happy with the stuff that the editor's been giving me lately. It's a lot of work, but I think that it's definitely going to be worth it, and I'm excited about it. I feel like I get to share that journey with you guys. It's like, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night. Probably been working for 70% of the day. The rest of that time was spent hanging out with Nico. You know, I can't spend every waking hour working on work stuff. You know, I do have to spend some time with my family. But here I am, and I'm unwinding. I haven't smoked any weed. Usually when I smoke weed and then try to do a story, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's different, you know. I say some weird ass shit when I'm stoned, you know, and I do. It's weird. I'm weird. So what? All right, let's get into the story. This is going to be a juvenile delinquency. We're coming up, I think, what is it, like the 20th? It's time for me to start doing 2-a-days, you know. 3 is what I've always said I've wanted to do. I don't think that I can do that while the documentary is in the post-production like it is right now, but it's time to do 2-a-day. So that's going to be my goal this week, 2 videos each day, and I'm going to try to stick to that. A lot of times you guys are like, don't say shit that you can't do, bitch, and I'm like, okay, so I'm going to try to do 2 videos each day. And I try to do one when I wake up and then do one at this time. And I feel like I can get 2 done a day. That way that I can hit all the exclusive tiers. You know, if I do 2 a day for the rest of the month, that's 20 fucking stories that that'll be uploaded before the month's over. So I want to do that. All right, let's get into the juvenile delinquency. So where we left off last time, it was interesting, you know, because basically it was the first experience I had where I saw how truly unfair the world was. My parents basically got extorted by fucking Chomo, this guy Justin. I have no idea what the guy's last name is. I wish I did because I'd put that bitch on blast right now. Put his photo on Patreon and you guys could harass him. Just like, remember that time with Carlos Tires? But, you know, we really did, no bullshit. We tried to kill that guy, and I'd say we were pretty close. If you had seen what I had seen, I mean, what he looked like when he was crawling at me, he was like, "Rah!" and like blood was pouring out of him. It was horrific. I mean, even though it was a Chomo, it's still, whenever I've seen violence like that, and I saw a lot of it in prison, when I saw that kid slit his wrist when I was 15, whenever I see violence like that in real life, it makes me really, like, nauseous. Depending on how violent it is, you know. Always keen to see a good old rough butt fucking. That doesn't make me nauseous at all. But anytime I see blood, it makes me queasy. I've never been the kind of guy that, like, I'm at a bar and people stop fighting. I'm like, whoa, let's go watch the fight. Yeah, I fucking love seeing guys hurt each other. Not into that, you know. I never have been. And the older that I've gotten, the more that I've been around really bad stuff, the more I've gotten like that. But that was my first experience with trying to kill a Chomo. Not my last. Remember, I tried to kill Kate's dad as well. When I flew out to Boston, I hit him with a skateboard. But that was like the first time that I had been involved with like some premeditated plan like that to kill someone. Looking back, that's some pretty hardcore shit. And then I find out that my parents had to basically pay Justin's parents off. And then here I am, selling coke after Jill had cheated on me, pouring rain, and my dad, who was pretty suspicious of me up until the point that I got caught when he actually picked up the landline and heard that I was doing a coke deal, When he actually caught me, we end up getting in a fight. He throws the landline at me, and I hit him. Punch him. I ain't no bitch. What, Frank? Fuck you. Bah! Bump Eminem. I was like, my dad's a bitch. And the guy that was living at me, we'll call him Poppius. It's hard for me to remember that I have, that I haven't told you guys what that guy's real name is. And real quick, just so that you know, and before I forget, and then we'll get into the linear chronology of this story. But this particular guy, he lived with me, right? I told you guys the story about when we were 16, the infamous Mustang story. We'd just taken mushrooms, and we're on a one-way street. This guy named Matt Simpson was sitting up front, and he opens the door of the Mustang, and we're on a one-way street. Car comes and knocks the door off. Now, we had just eaten the mushrooms. They hadn't kicked in quite yet. It was raining that day as well. We drive up to this guy who we're calling, for the sake of the story, we're calling him Poppius. I go up to this guy Poppius's house. His mom is like a classic bimbo, like blonde hair, big boobs. She looks like Cindy, but she's like a soccer mom version of Cindy. And she's, to this day, she goes around fucking millionaires and billionaires. And this particular guy that she was with, my friend Poppius' stepdad, he was a billionaire. And he had done Fed time for selling helicopters to North Korea. And they were just a bad couple. Like, they were definitely transplants from the 80s. Like, coke couple, violent, probably drank Jack on the Rocks and used to beat up my friend. And that particular time when we had eaten mushrooms, they beat him up to the point where my parents decided to take custody of the guy. So he was my brother. He was like my surrogate brother when I was growing up. And that's who I had, gotten into heroin with. That's who I'd gotten into cocaine with before that. And I ended up getting sent away. And while I was away, he had done a string of armed robberies. My parents kicked him out of their house after I got sent back to rehab, which will be at the end of this series. He went on to do armed robberies. He got in a lot of trouble. We stayed friends throughout the years. And then when my fiance, Casey, 2015, after I'd been sober for 3 years, when we were breaking up, his fiance, he was engaged to a different girl. She was breaking up with him. So him and I were both going through a breakup, and he was a little bitch about it. He would cry. Like, I'm not a crier. That's not true. I am a crier. But this particular time when we were both going through respective breakups, he was like crying all the time. I was like, dude, stop being a bitch. He's like, it was like all like super exaggerated crying too, where you're like, is this guy for real? Jeez, it's like it's just me and him in a room, and I'm embarrassed for him. So, but the point is we had gone through, we'd gone through this breakup pain together. He was there, we're neck and neck. Like, he was watching me go through all this while he was going through with his breakup. And I ended up going to rehab. This is back in 2015, just in case you guys are confused with my rambling backstory. And while I go to rehab, I would call him, and there were a couple times where he was telling me that he wanted to shoot himself, He's like, I have a gun and I want to kill myself. And I would, I'd call him and I'd be like, I love you and I care about you, and, you're worth something. You shouldn't kill yourself. You're at least worth $10. There's probably some old perverted guy that'll finger you for that. And you'd be like, oh my God, she left me. And, he's just crying over this broad, right? While I'm in rehab, I called Jeff one day. So this is all within like a few month period. I called Jeff. We're talking. The girl that had left me, my fiance, ended up marrying another guy that we knew. This is like 2 months after she left me. clearly they were talking at the tail end of our relationship. And my friend Papias, who had been there with me, neck and neck, he's going through his breakup, I'm going through my breakup. He was the fucking best man at my ex-fiance's wedding with some guy that, like, he didn't even know that well. And that was out of spite towards me. He'd always, I think, had some weird jealousy about me. I mean, I have a small dick, but his dick's even smaller. So he's like, that guy's dick's bigger and it's still small. He was always jealous of me. I don't know about that, but I think more jealous because I had parents that actually loved me, and his mom was some, glorified hood rat, the classic 80s blonde bimbo, kind of like Michelle Pfeiffer and Scarface, if that helps you kind of imagine her. And then at one point when I was selling heroin, because she got into heroin with him years later, she called me late night and she's like, I don't have any money. I can write you a check, you just can't cash it. I'm like, it's like 3 a.m. I was like, I don't know. I'm tired. If you don't have money, I can't. She's like, I'll suck your dick. I'm like, oh my God. I didn't let her. Only because I was strung out and didn't have any libido. I definitely probably would have if I wasn't so strung out. But anyway, the point is this piece of shit, this guy that my parents essentially adopted, this guy that had gone through this like traumatic breakup with me when my ex-fiance, this is, I'd been sober for 3 years. I relapsed. She leaves me. And his chick was leaving him at the time. So we were like, basically we'd just 69, and instead of sucking each other's dicks, we'd just cry. But we'd assume the 69 position. We just kind of like nuzzle into each other's respective shoulders. We'd be like, is this gay? He's like, no, I'm sad. I'm like, Me too. Does my dick stink? He's like, kinda. All right. Sorry for the backstory. But so that's why I don't like the guy. And that's why I won't even give that motherfucker the satisfaction of saying his name in my stories. I don't know if I ever told you about the time that I had met Paul Walker. That was through his ex-girlfriend. I'm going to tell you that real quick because that's a classic. Very short story. And then we'll get on to the story. This helps me warm up too, by the way. So he goes on when... God, I'm jumping around a lot tonight, but I think I've told you guys this story, but there was a particular time in our lives, probably when we were like in our early 20s, where he went on to date Paul Walker's ex-girlfriend. Now, by the way, Paul Walker, we're talking about the same one, the hot one from Fast and the Furious. That Paul Walker. He was a chomo, by the way. He was dating this girl that Papias was dating. And Paul Walker was like 25, dating this chick when he was living in Las Vegas. And this chick was like 16 and he was 25. That's not cool. So, but anyway, she had dated him. She went on to date this guy that had lived with me and my brother, Papias. And she didn't like me, because this piece of shit, he would always blame me, he would always blame me for his heroin addiction. Like, I wouldn't even be there. I'd be, like, living in Florida, and he'd relapse. He'd be like, Ryan texted me, and he whispered that I should relapse. She's like, what do you mean he whispered in a text message? I don't know. He's a really bad influence. He has that kind of tonality. And I was like, what? He'd always blame me for shit that was clearly not my fault, right? So this girl didn't like me. Now, at the time, this is in our early 20s. This is around the time that I was a drug dealer, selling all the Molly and stuff. I was selling coke at the time. His girlfriend was a cokehead. She didn't do any drugs. He shot heroin. I shot heroin. She was against heroin, but she was a cokehead. Classic hypocrisy, right? And one night she calls me. Now, I'm almost positive I've told you guys this story, but just so you know, it's the same person. She calls me and she's like whispering. She's like, hey, can you get any blow? And I was like, yeah, I got some. She's like, can you bring me an 8-ball? Your dick stinks. I'm sorry. I felt like saying that. I was like, yeah, I'll be right there. Now, I went there quickly because it was one of those things where this guy was one of my best friends. And it's always an unwanted and unwelcomed complication when one of your best friends' girlfriends doesn't like you. She didn't like me because I was the junkie. Ryan's the junkie. his dick stinks, he's a bitch, all that. So I wanted to try to make good with her. So anyway, I bring an 8-ball over to her house. She opens the door. She's like, come on. There's a guy passed out on her couch. I look, and I'm thinking it's my friend, but I know that it's not my friend because my friend's snowboarding in Mammoth at the time. So we go into this bathroom together. She's like, come into the bathroom. I'll give you a line. So I go in the bathroom, do a line with her. And I go, hey, who's the guy that's sleeping on your couch? She's like, it's my ex. I'm like, Paul Walker? She's like, shh. Yes. I was like, what? I want to meet him. She's like, no. He's really drunk and he's passed out. Just give me the blow. I'll give you a line and then you just got to go. Okay. I was like, all right. So I do a line with her. I'm leaving. I have a little flash, little flip phone or whatever. This is in like 2005, probably 2006. See him passed out. I go up to him. I shake him awake. Put my arm around his neck. I take my flip phone. I was like, Paul Walker. And he's like, and I took a picture. That's it. That's the end of the story. Sometime later, I ran into him again. I was like, you remember me? I woke you up and I took a picture. And he was like, yeah, you're fucking awesome. I was like, I know. That's my Paul Walker story. So, point is I don't like that guy. So when I'm telling these stories from this period, juvenile delinquency era, he was very important to me back then. He hadn't fucked me over. It's to the point with him now where I had run into him at a bar last time I saw him a few years ago, and we basically had words, I was like, you're a piece of shit for what you did to me. You saw me crying about my ex, and then you go on, you're the best man at her wedding. But back then, back in this time period, back in juvenile delinquency, this guy was like, he's a brother to me. I love this guy. If he had asked me to French kiss him, I would have been like, you bet. Such a good homie. Sup? I probably would have done anything for that guy. So, when the police came that night, after I hit my dad, they handcuffed me and they basically just wanted me to apologize to him. I was like, no, fuck that. My dad's a faggot. Yeah, I'm a disrespectful 16-year-old kid. I don't use that word very often, by the way. Faggot. It's kind of like an ugly word or whatever. I'm just saying that because of the YouTube monetization, people. I really don't care about that word now, for real, though. I don't like that. I don't like that word, and I don't like retard. Those are two words I just don't like. But I did used to say them when I was that age. So they end up arresting me. They take me away. Now, I had told my roommate, Poppius, I'm like, hey, man, flush all the coke. So, he goes and he does all that. Police take me and they put me in their car. And I'm handcuffed. And I remember, it wasn't the first time that I was in the back of a squad car, but this particular time, I remember it was raining outside. And I remember being cuffed and I can clearly remember, how uncomfortable those hard plastic seats were. I mean, seats that I would obviously become very used to as my life went on. And I remember that the song Doing Time by Sublime was on. And I remember that, as weird as the sound, I felt cool. It was like, summertime and the living's easy. And I was like, yeah, fucking pigs. Take me to Juvie then. So they're driving me. They're not really talking to me. I'm just listening to this music. And, they're making calls on their radio or whatever. And they get a call. I hear it over the radio system that they don't have room in juvenile hall for a male intake. So now they're trying to figure out what to do with me. And they end up pulling over, and I don't know who they called, but they have some conversation. I think maybe they had gotten my parents involved at this point. I don't really remember. It was a long time ago. All I remember is that song playing, and I remember the rain pouring down. And they tell me that my parents don't want me. They're like, yeah, your parents they don't want custody of you anymore. You're too problematic for them. You're too much of a nightmare. And they're like, and to be honest, I wouldn't want you either. You have a punk ass attitude. And I was just, I don't remember what I said to them, but I'm sure that it was something where I had a really bad attitude. And I was saying punk ass shit to them because that's how I was at that age. So ultimately, they take me to a rehab or a orphanage called Noah's Anchorage. I remember pulling up to this place. It was somewhere in Santa Barbara. I think it was like on the west side of Santa Barbara. And I remember they pulled me up to this place and they're like, "We're taking you to the Anchorage." And I was like, "The what?" And they're like, "The Anchorage." Sounded crazy. Like I felt like my intestines were getting sold or something. I was like, what does that mean? They're like, "It's an orphanage." And I was like, "An orphanage? The fuck?" I said, "I'm not an orphan." They're like, "You are now, kid." And I remember like as they said that, I was like, now, mind you, I'm addicted to heroin at this point in my life. I'm smoking black tar heroin every single day off tinfoil. So it wasn't so much the orphanage that freaked me out, but I knew that I was about to be out of my dope. I knew that. And I guess maybe orphanage kind of sounded crazy. I mean, the fuck wants to go to an orphanage when you have a family? And I had a good life. Like I'm selling blow. My girlfriend Jillian was 21 before I caught her fucking Tron in the back of the car. You know, my parents were the kind of parents where they'd always let me have people over. I always had parties at my house. We're always like snorting coke. There's girls like running around topless and they're just like, "Yeah." My dad's just like, "It's okay. It's all right. You guys can all be here. I don't even care." And we'd be like doing blow and shit. And he didn't, my parents are weird, you know? They've always been the kind of parents that, for the most part, if I'm happy, they kind of just go along with whatever I'm doing. And that's not always necessarily a good thing. In a lot of ways, that enabled a lot of the shit that I did. I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm just stating what happened. So, going from an environment like that where I was pretty spoiled and I had like unlimited money, it seemed like. I mean, I was selling a lot of blow. That little period after Justin got beat up with the brick or whatever it was, and I had gone out to Jillian's dad's house, that's like really when like it went from me just selling a little amount of coke to quite a bit where I'm like making real money. So to go from that kind of comfort to this was a big shift for me. And honestly, I didn't even really know what to expect from an orphanage. I remember it looked like super ominous because it was raining and I'm just looking at this Noah's Anchorage sign and it had some sort of like religious connotation. I think there was like a cross on it. I was like, fuck. Go to some place where there's going to be a bunch of nuns, like in the movie Problem Child or something. That's what it felt like. And I was handcuffed. Now, at the time, I remember the guy that was living with me, Papias. Like, Eminem was really big back in that time. And we had both buzzed our heads, and he bleached his hair like Eminem, and I dyed mine black. So I had, like, a buzz cut with, like, dyed jet black hair. I just looked like a little drug addict kid. I was all pale. I was all strung out on smoking heroin. They bring me into this orphanage. Now I see all these like 9-year-old kids in onesies and shit running around. You know, there's people playing like Operation, the board game, on the floor. It's all these little kids. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like addicted to heroin at the time. I'm like, what am I going to do at a place like this? I felt creeped out. And then I set my eyes on this girl. And she was beautiful. You know, she was about my age, maybe like a year younger than me. And I remember she had her tongue pierced. And I'd always heard that girls that have their tongue pierced not only suck good dick, but love to suck dick. And I remember just looking at her and I was always that kind of guy where like if I see a pretty girl, like I'm like, fuck it. This isn't that bad of a situation. I'm gonna try to mac on her, which is, I'm sorry that I said that's not something I've said since that time period. But she was kind of like checking me out. She was the only person there, from what I could see, in this living room that was my age. I mean, it's what you'd expect from an orphanage, you know? Like I said, kids playing board games, people were watching cartoons, and then there was this girl with the tongue piercing, and she was looking at me, and I was looking at her. I was all cuffed. I was like, just thinking in my mind, I'm like, man, I probably look bomb, as all fuck right now. Just to be completely honest with you, kinda. The cops uncuffed me. I had to fill out all this paperwork, like any institution, any program, rehab, jail, any place that I've ever been, there's always an intake process where you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. And this girl was still in the living room, and she was kind of standing there, and she was looking at me. It's the kind of thing, and when a girl's looking at you, when you look at them, and then they like look away. And I'm always the kind of guy where I'll just like keep looking. Like if I'm at an AA meeting and a girl's doing that, I'll just like keep staring at her. And then sometimes like someone will come up to me and they're like, hey, my friend Amy said you were looking at her and we want to know, are you a sex offender? I'm like, no. And if I was, do you think I would tell you? And they're like, sex offender humor? That's fucking disgusting. What's up with my hair right now? Jeez. Just gonna rock it like that. I need a haircut. I've been working hard. That's what happens. So they do this intake with me. Girl's kind of looking at me, whatever. She ends up going away somewhere. And they're kind of breaking down all the rules for me, and they're like saying all the shit that like I do. They're like, no skateboarding, no rap music, no tobacco. I'm like, no tobacco? I was like, what the fuck? No drugs, no alcohol, no sex. I'm like, can I play Operation with the 8-year-olds? They're like, no. And I was like, what the fuck kind of place is this? And they end up taking me to my room. So it's a classic, like, it's one of those rooms where, there's probably like 6 or 7 beds. They're not bunk beds. It's just beds that are scattered throughout the room. Kind of reminded me of the places that I would get sent to in Utah. Any rehab, any program like that, you're basically just bunked up with a bunch of people. And they took me up to my room. They gave me towels. And right as I get into the room, I think it all kind of hit me at once. Like, first of all, I'm not going to have dope. So that was something that was definitely a pressing concern. And there was also the fact that my parents didn't want me anymore. And it was like, I was angry and I was acting like a punk ass kid when I hit my dad. But all of a sudden, being at this place, I think all of it kind of hit me, the reality of it. Like, my parents don't want me anymore, It kind of felt like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, like in the plot break in Act 2 of that movie, where like, the theory of being home alone sounds good, but then when he's actually alone, he starts to miss his family. And I think I started missing my parents right there and then, just looking at these beds and like the whole situation was pretty bleak. Probably about an hour after all of that, it was lights out and these other kids come into the room. Now, I think the only other kid that was even close to my age was probably a couple years younger than me. So I was 17. I think there was a 15-year-old in there. And he kind of explained to me how it was. And he said that they were really strict. And I was like, hey, like, they said we can't smoke cigarettes. Am I allowed to smoke cigarettes? He's like, look, man, I don't want you to take this the wrong way or anything. But if I found out that you're smoking a cigarette, I'm going to fucking tell on you. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, my entire family got killed in a fire. I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't care. Fuck you. And I remember I was like all mad at him and I was like, I'm going to sleep. And I just passed out. And that was like the end of my night. That's pretty much all that happened. This kid basically told me that if I got caught smoking a cigarette, he was going to tell on me. And I remember just passing out. I wake up the next morning to the staff waking me up. And it's like breakfast time. Now at this orphanage, everybody ate together every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You'd go to school. So, somebody that was my age obviously wouldn't eat lunch there, but you had to be with all of the kids at the orphanage for breakfast. And then you had to be back, for dinner and you weren't allowed to leave once you get back. So I think the curfew at this place was like 4 p.m. after you get back from high school, and they take you there. They actually take you to high school. So I'm sitting there, eating breakfast, and I'm noticing that girl that I saw the night before, she's not there. It's all little kids. I feel weird as fuck. I'm eating like Fruity Pebbles with all these kids and I'm dope sick. You know, I'm just starting to feel sick. Back in that time period, I had heroin so often because I was selling coke. I had money all the time. I never really experienced being dope sick that often, but that morning I was definitely sick, and I already known that was going to happen the night before because I didn't have a chance to bring anything with me. I didn't have any coke. I didn't have any heroin. So they end up shuttling me to school, you know, and right when I get to school, I go down to Lodi Lane, the same place that I was hanging out with the day that Beast had come and asked me if I wanted to go do that lick with him, if I wanted to go rob that weed house. It's the place where everyone smokes cigarettes. My friend fingered some girl's ass there. Remember, we've covered this already. And I ran into Poppius. He's like, "Oh my God, bro, are you okay?" And I was like, "Get me well." And he's like, "All right." So we end up going to these tennis courts and we're like crouched down smoking heroin. And it's a Friday. I remember it was a Friday. And he's like, "How is that place that you're at? Is it cool?" He's like, "Are there any chicks there?" And I was like, "Well, there's one, and she has her tongue pierced." He's like, "Man," he's like, "you're so lucky." I'm like, "How am I lucky? You get laid every night at my parents' house." We were having, you know, we'd always have people over there. He was staying in like the guest room there. So they had like this outside door. So he had it really good there. And he was telling me that him and a group of my friends were all going to go to LA that night. And he's like, "You should come with me." And I was like, "Well, I have to be back at the orphanage by 4:00. And he starts laughing at me. He's like, "You have to be back at the orphanage by 4?" He's like, "Are you really going to go back?" And it was like the first time that I hadn't even like considered like an escape plan or anything, but I had this freedom because they had shuttled me to school. And I was just thinking about it. I was like, yeah, fuck that. I am going to go with you guys to LA. I'm not going to go back to this fucking orphanage. Now remember, my friend Orlando's dad had this house and he was never home. So that was like one of the designated party places. We'd always ditch school. We'd go over there. We'd drink. We'd do coke in the day. You know, whatever. That was just one of those houses that we'd always go to. So I think by second period, Poppius ended up bringing me over there. And at the time, he was dating this girl named Kelly. Kelly was a girl that was from another school. And she was like big time slut, right? She grew up to be an even bigger time slut. She was dating Pauly Shore for a little bit. She introduced me to Luke Wilson. She was one of those girls that ended up like moving to LA and she just got passed around by like D-list celebrities. But back then she was one of the prettier girls in my school and Poppius had just started dating her. So she was there at Orlando's house. We were with Poppius. It was me, Poppius, her, and Orlando was there. And a group of our friends were coming over there. And Poppius and I were skateboarding in the front of the house, like in the street. You know, it was like a busy street. And Orlando's house was, you know, like right when you go out the front door, you're like just in this busy street. So we're sitting out there and we're skateboarding. And there's like this kind of like a blind corner where if a car is going fast enough, they could hit you very easily in the area that we were skateboarding. And we're skateboarding right there and a Porsche comes and almost hits us, right? And he just like slams on his brakes. Me and Poppy as they're skateboarding. And the guy's like, "Hey man," he's like some Guido thug, you know, it's like some guy that looked like he would have been on Jersey Shore when he was younger, but he's a little older now. Just some like buff guy wearing a polo shirt. Probably had a small little Italian dick too. He looked like that kind of guy. He's wearing like these like, you know, Back to the Future reflective sunglasses. He's like, "The fuck, man? You guys didn't see my Porsche?" My friend Pop is like, "Fuck your Porsche." And he's like, "What? Fuck you." And he spits on my friend. As he spits on Poppius, this girl, Kelly, my friend's girlfriend, picks up a rock, throws it at this dude's car. I don't think she meant to hit it. You know, it's like a rock about that big. And it just smashes out the back window. The guy's like, "Hey, what the fuck?" And we all freak out. So we run back into Orlando's house. Now, we're like kind of hiding in the backyard. I don't know why we were scared of this guy. There was like 3 of us. I guess because he was like a big buff, small dick Italian guy. We thought he might hold us down and try to fuck us or something. He seemed like that kind of guy for sure. An older Jersey Shore type guy. So we're like kind of hiding in the backyard because he clearly saw what house we had gone back into. And I know that we were all kind of freaked out. He starts walking literally into the property. Like, you can't do that. You can't just walk on somebody's property like that. But we did Kelly smashed out the back window. And I remember he walks around the house and we see him. He doesn't see that we see him. There's this garden hose. So Kelly is like, watch this. And she turns on the garden hose. And like, so the water comes out. You know, it comes out at like a pretty high speed or whatever. She puts her thumb over the nozzle and it starts spraying. And she just looks at the guy and just starts spraying him. Gets him completely soaked. The guy's just screaming at us. Now he's soaked as she's spraying him and we all run away. This guy's Porsche is still parked in the middle of the street where the back window got busted out. And I see it, and the guy's key is just right in the ignition. I just jump, like, come on, get in. So I jump in the driver's seat. This is after after she had sprayed him. So we sprayed the guy, we run out. I jump in the driver's seat. Poppius jumps in the front and she kind of like dives in, like kind of like diagonal crooked, like with like her legs sticking out of the window. And I just take off. Now it's stick shift. I already knew how to drive stick shift because Poppius had a Mustang, but I wasn't very good at it. This guy's all sopping wet and he comes out of the house and he just puts his hands up in the air and I just speed off. I stole this guy's Porsche straight up. Problem is that he knew which house we were at. It was at Orlando's dad's house. I mean, he actually went to the property and we're just driving away. And I mean, it was exhilarating, you know, my heart's beating fast. First time ever driving a Porsche. The Porsches go very fast. I know very little about cars, so I can't tell you what the exact model it was, but it was really fast and the back window was shattered. So, you know, it was like all the wind was just, I remember it just felt super crazy. It felt like we were in a wind tunnel, you know, like the windows were down in the back. So it just was all this air rushing in there. We're speeding down the street and we start thinking about it. We're like, well, this guy obviously is going to know, he's going to be able to figure out where we were because we're at Orlando's house. Orlando was inside when this happened. So we didn't really know what to do, but we ended up going up towards my parents' house. There's like this park that overlooks all of Santa Barbara. And we just bring this car up there and we park it, trying to kind of figure out what our game plan is. Last thing we wanted to do is be driving around in a stolen car when this guy knew which house we were hanging out at. I mean, it was Orlando's dad's house. Probably at this point, the police had already been called. That's something that we were pretty sure of. I don't know why I stole the car. I think it was just out of instinct, you know? And I remember we were laughing because this dude was sopping wet because Kelly had sprayed him with the hose. And it was one of those things where as soon as he was sopping wet, he kind of just was like he was like shocked that it happened. Like we'd already broken this guy's window. Now he's soaking wet. And it was one of those things where we weren't really thinking about what we were doing. But it was obvious that there was a good chance that we were going to get caught now because he knew the house that we were at. I don't know if Orlando would give us up or not, but when it comes to Grand Theft Auto, shit like that, you really never know who you can trust. So we're parked up at this park. This park is probably like a 10-minute walk from my parents' house. So we decide just to ditch it. It didn't matter if we weren't in the car and we end up getting caught. Just the fact that we had taken the car from point A to point B meant that we had committed like a very serious felony. I was already kicked out of my parents' house. And Poppius's car was still at Orlando's house. So we were kind of in this predicament because we could walk to my parents' house, but I wasn't even allowed there. They thought I was at this orphanage. And again, there was a good chance that we were going to get caught if we went anywhere back to that house. We were planning on going down to LA that night anyway. I forget why they were going down there. I think there was a concert or like a rave or something. I can't remember what the reason that we wanted to go to LA was. But we end up going back to my parents' house. Now we're freaked out, of course, and my parents work all day. So we decided just to kind of like sneak in there and lay low for a little bit. Plus we can call Orlando because we could call his landline and we could try to assess the situation. So we break into my parents' house. We walk from the park down there, because that's like a 10-minute walk. and we end up calling Orlando. Now he picks up his landline. Sure enough, the cops came, and he said that because Poppius's Mustang was parked in the driveway, that's who the suspect was. Like, they had his name, they had like all of his information. They didn't have my name, they didn't have her name, but they knew that there was a guy, 2 guys and a girl involved. And because Poppius's car was parked right there, when the police came, somehow they had gotten a hold of Orlando's dad, and they asked him whose car it was. He's like, well, it's not my car. And so that's how they had figured out that Poppius was the person that was driving. That's not his real name. I hate that that's like the name that I've dubbed him for the sake of this series. Because it sounds fucking awkward. Poppius, yeah, me and Poppius, we're just chilling. Hey, Poppius. Oh, hey, Ryan. You want some popcorn? I do, Poppius. Good guess. I mean, it sounds like that. That's a whole nother story why I'm calling him that. But so now, basically, he is the one that is kind of bearing all the blame for this, because they actually have his name, and Orlando's dad's trying to save face. He's not trying to get in trouble for this, you know? He just simply told them that he didn't say any of our names. I don't even think that he knew that we were there. He simply said that the car that was parked in front of their house, that Mustang, didn't belong to him. So they put 2 and 2 together, and Orlando's like, yeah, the cops are basically looking for you. So now we had even more reason to get the fuck out of town. I mean, at first we wanted to go down to LA just for recreational purposes or whatever. Now we were going down there because we were scared that we were going to get in trouble by the law. I wasn't even allowed to be at my parents' house. So we ended up staying up there for a little bit. Orlando comes and he picks us up, and he had this Volvo station wagon, and we start going down to LA. Now, at the time, and I cannot remember what the fuck we were going down there for. It doesn't really matter. It has nothing to do with this story. But at that time, I had a camcorder. The same camcorder, if you've seen some of the footage from my high school videos that I'd uploaded them, I think on the $10 tier on Patreon, maybe the $20 tier. But I used to have a camcorder back then, and I have all this crazy footage, like me snorting coke on flipped over skateboard, fist fights that my friends got in. I think there's a fight that I got in on there. Bunch of shit. You know, I had a camcorder, and back then I used to just record all of my juvenile delinquency stuff. Once Orlando picked us up, he's like, basically you're fucked. Like, they were looking for Poppius for Grand Theft Auto, but also for assault. And also due to the fact that Kelly had broken the window, and she had sprayed him with the hose. I guess that can be considered assault, which sounds really silly, but I guess if you spray somebody with the hose, that can be considered assault. It didn't really matter because we were all minors, but Orlando was like, yeah, you guys are pretty much fucked. You know, let's go down to LA. So he had this Volvo station wagon. I had this camcorder. And I remember Poppius took Kelly in the back seat. Like, they were in the back seat while we were driving. I was driving passenger. Orlando was the driver. And Poppius starts boning Kelly in the back seat. Now, we're like probably like an hour away from Santa Barbara going south. We're in bumper-to-bumper traffic. And she has like this little like tennis skirt on. That's what she was wearing. She has it hiked up, and Poppius is just boning her doggy style while we're in bumper to bumper traffic. And I remember like this old couple, like, and I have like a backwards hat, and I have like this camcorder, like one of those like old corny, like America's Funniest Home Video camcorders. And I'm filming her getting boned by Poppius. I remember this old couple was just like so offended, like, ew. And I remember like filming it, and I was narrating the whole time. I'm glad that I don't have this footage anymore because, well, I'm 35 now, and this would be considered child pornography. But this is just what I remember going down there. You know, she's bent over, and he's just boning her, and all these people that in bumper to bumper traffic, they can't help but look. There's like this like van with like a bunch of school kids in it, and they're looking, and my buddy's just boning her. He's like giving me high five while I'm, filming it with my backwards hat and and that girl, Kelly, by the way, she was always like, she was one of the sluttier little hood rats that we were all kind of passing around back in that time. She's one of those girls that had come from another school, mysteriously like transfer districts, even though her parents didn't live anywhere close to the school that we were all at Santa Barbara High. And the rumor was because she had fucked one of her teachers at this other school, Dos Pueblos, the same high school that Katy Perry had gone to. And she just comes over to our school, and she's one of those girls that made a lot of problems because she went around fucking everyone. She went around fucking dudes that had girlfriends. She was just one of those people that brought a lot of drama with her. And here we are, she's in the back seat getting boned by Poppius, and I'm filming it. And this went on for like a good 45 minutes. And he didn't know that I slept with her probably, 4 or 5 months before that. I think when Jillian and I were on and off, at one point she'd come over to my parents'. It was really sleazy how it went down too. She came over to my parents' house, and I was like, hey, what do you think you'd look like in this football jersey? And she's like, I don't know. I was like, why don't you wear it with no other clothes on? She's like, okay. And I remember she just took off her clothes in my parents' room. I think she'd come over one day, like we were ditching school or something. So she like took off all of her clothes. She's just naked. She has no pants on. She's just wearing this jersey. It looks like a dress, like covering her. And I'm like, hey, it'd be really funny if I had like one of those disposable paper cameras. I'm like, it'd be super funny if you got in bed with me and we like made it look like we just had sex. Like I'll be smoking a cigarette, and like once we get in bed, just take off the jersey so that you're naked. I'll take off my shirt, and we'll like take pictures, and we'll have cigarettes in our mouth. It'll look like we just had sex. He's like, oh my God, it's so funny. Let's do that. I was like, all right. So she ends up getting naked, and we get in the bed, and well, one thing led to another, and I fucked her. There was also oral involved, but anyway, Poppius didn't know that. She was just one of those girls that kind of stuff happened to pretty frequently, Everybody kind of had sex with her, and everybody didn't want to admit it, and then she ended up fucking Pauly Shore all these years later. But anyway, so I film her having sex with Poppius in the back of this Volvo. Orlando's laughing the whole time. He thinks it's like the funniest thing ever. And we end up getting down to LA. Now, Poppius had a cell phone at the time. I did too, but I don't remember why I didn't have it. I didn't have it for some reason. But my parents end up calling Poppius, the guy that had been living with me. And they said that the police had been over there, not only looking for him for grand theft auto and for assault charges, but also looking for me because I was supposed to be at Noah's Anchorage, the orphanage. This is like much later in the day now. It's probably like 6 or 7 at night. We're just getting into LA. So he's talking to my parents, and it's the kind of thing where like he's putting the phone down. He's like, they're charging me with assault, or they're looking for me for assault. And they know that you're not at the orphanage. And they're like, are you with Ryan? He's like, no. I told him that I'm not with you. And they're like, hey, we just heard you talking to him. He's like, oh, I got to go. Hangs up. So we knew that we were all basically fucked. I was fucked because I left the orphanage. They took me there because they didn't have room for me at juvenile hall. So I was basically not court ordered, but I was under the police department's, it was like their responsibility what happened to me because my parents had signed over custody of me. They just couldn't deal with me anymore. So now their other so-called kid, my surrogate stepbrother, is literally wanted for assault and for grand theft auto. And this girl's dad, Kelly, had gotten involved too. I think that Orlando's parents had called her. Somehow they figured out that that was the girl because the guy had said that some blonde girl had sprayed the dude with the Porsche with the hose. And it became this big old thing where we knew that we were completely fucked if we had gone back to Santa Barbara. All we had was this Volvo, and I think between us we had like $200 or $300. We also had heroin, we also had coke, and I had some friends down in LA from when I'd been sent away from Utah. I had a bunch of friends that lived down in LA, so we were just planning on going and partying with them. Again, I forget exactly the reason that we were down there, but once we did get down there, we got a hotel. Poppius got that call. And we found out that we were in pretty bad trouble back in Santa Barbara. And we can get into this, not to leave it on too much of a cliffhanger, but, you know, we can get into the rest of this story in the next installment of Juvenile Delinquency. I'm going to do a Florida and a What Really Happens tomorrow. I think I'm going to do Florida first, and I'm going to do a What Really Happened. It's just a busy day today, but I wanted to squeeze something in. All right, guys. I appreciate you all. Love you. Palabra.